So I'm about the 1,000,000th person to do this, but nonetheless, for sake of completeness, this is how I do giant crystals. I use these as showpieces for my Necron Tomb Worlds, but you could easily, with a different color selection, use it in your D&D campaign. Blue and purple for the Underdark, red-orange for the Elemental Plane of Fire, you get the idea. Stick around at the end, I'll show you a few in-context examples. I do use a hot wire cutter and an airbrush, but in case you don't have one or both of those tools, I'm going to show you how to do it with just a plain crafting knife and with a plain old brush. We'll be using extruded polystyrene, or home insulation, to make the crystals. I use 1 inch thick. For the larger ones, I actually want it to be 2 inches thick, so either buy some of that or make it yourself like this. Some white PVA glue, spread it out for full coverage, and stick together. Place a book or something on it and leave it to dry overnight. So first, cut a rectangular shaped piece like this. Then slice off 2 opposing corners. If you use a knife, make sure you have a relatively fresh blade, and don't just push down, draw it back and forth in order to get a nice clean cut. Then go at one end from an extreme angle like this. Flip it over and take off some more. I usually do 4 or 5 strikes to form the tip of the crystal. As for the bottom, if you cut it perpendicularly, it's going to point straight upwards when we mount it on the base. That's kind of boring, so cut it at a bit of an angle instead. Of course, if you have a hot wire cutter like the Proxen table, I highly recommend you use that, both for ease and for cleanliness of cuts. Now as for the base, these are cork sheets, a 1/4 inch thick, and I think they're 12 inches square. You can find them at most any crafting store. They're very flimsy. We'll address that in a moment. Dry fit your crystals to get a general idea of the shape, draw out the boundary, and then begin tearing it out. By tearing, you get a nice jagged, rocky, natural looking edge. On to my favorite material, chipboard. This is Graphics medium chipboard, very sturdy. Trace the shape onto it, then cut it out and attach it to the cork with any kind of glue will work, but I use hot glue because it's strong and fast. Now the base is nice and rigid. Attach the crystals. Again, I used hot glue. Flock the base. Cover it with white PVA glue and try and focus the larger aggregate around the base of the crystals and then fine sand everywhere else. Once it's totally dry, mix up some white glue and water, about 50-50, in a spray bottle and hit the entire piece. This is going to help secure those larger pebbles as well as any loose sand. I'm not going to do this on camera because it's really messy. Go outside and do it. This will take a solid day to dry. Make sure you let it become totally bone dry. Paint. I'm doing green crystals, but whatever you choose, apply a dark version of that color to the crystals as a base coat. With cheap acrylic craft paint, you'll probably need 2 coats. For the ground, black. Again, probably need 2 coats. Next, apply an overbrush of dark gray to the base. This is heavier than a dry brush, but lighter than a base coat. Aim for like 80% coverage. Then dry brush with a plain gray to make all that detail pop. As for the crystals, let's pause for a moment. First I'll show you how to do this with a brush, and then I'll go back and show you how to do it with an airbrush. Take your medium green and basically do a heavy dry brush with it. The direction of the brush strokes is what matters here. Begin at an edge with the brush angled and then whip it backwards so that the tip is away from the piece by the time it reaches the center. It's easier to just watch what I'm doing here than to try and describe it. The intended effect is that you have a gradient, dark green in the center of a face moving to lighter at the edges. Then take a lighter green and pretty much repeat that process, but this time a little bit less. This further helps the gradient. Lastly, edge highlight with a very light color. In this case, I'm actually using yellow to help intensify the glowing, but you could just as easily mix some white with one of your middle tones to get a highlight color. Alright, so here's the same idea, but done with an airbrush. Medium green along the edges, giving it some pretty strong trigger action. And be sure to hit the ground around the crystal. And lighter green, again along the edges but with less flow. And again hit the ground but with a smaller radius. And then same as before, edge highlight with a brush. And don't forget to dry brush that final color on the glow on the ground. And before we go to the table, I'd like to take a moment to draw your attention to Heroes Horde, which is an excellent resource for 3D printed scenery, including, but not limited to, all True Tiles products. So if you're into 3D printing, even if it's just to supplement your conventional crafting, it is worth a click to check it out and see what's what. So here's 4 pieces that I made, being used to show off my Necron army. I kind of got tired of fighting on Imperial worlds, more buildings, so wanted to do something weird, and this fit the bill perfectly. I used the same paints, same brands, same colors and everything as I used on the models just to help with coherency, and I think that kind of shows here. I've wanted to do crystals for a long time. I had tried chipboard, so I'd modeled them in 3ds Max and then unfolded them and then printed a template. Those were smoother, but really hard to produce. This ended up being a lot quicker. And here it is in use with some tiles. These are the cavern tiles from episode 28. And if you like the miniatures, check out episode 9 or live stream number 2. So you can see it just sits right there on top of the tiles. Looks very alien in that setting. Definitely a good centerpiece for some kind of weird encounter or puzzle. And here they are in a gridless setup, being used to define the boundaries of the cave or whatever the party's in. So you can see pretty versatile pieces like so much of what we do. Really livens up the table. Love the glow effect. I am Wyloch, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.